Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing Robert Eggers Retrospective series, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of Nosferatu. This is the last episode we're recording before we're going to see Nosferatu.
I was so excited. And honestly, this is the episode I was most, not nervous about, but was anticipating in a different way than the others. Because,
Why?
Well, because The Witch, which we covered last week, we covered it last week. And that is our favorite movie. We talked about that and how like daunting it was to finally talk about that on the show. And like that was sort of its own thing. But I was more than anything just excited about The Witch. The Lighthouse is a movie that we both love and have loved for a long time, and we knew that was going to be really fun to talk about too. And the short films, which we covered on our Patreon series, were really fun and interesting and something fresh and new because we hadn't seen those before. This one, I remember seeing The Northman and I wasn't disappointed when I saw it, but I was like, okay, that was fun. And then I kind of never thought about it since.
Yes.
So I was a little nervous to revisit. How did you feel going in?
No, we were both kind of unmoved when we saw it the first time. And I think we're going to close with that. I mean, we can jump to it now if you like.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, let me lay that out. Because
Okay.
we're talking about The Northman today, which is Robert Eggers' third film. It came out in 2022. It's 2 hours and 17 minutes long. And there is an asterisk next to this one that there isn't with The Witch or The Lighthouse because he didn't have final cut with this film. So there might have been some interference or it's not his unfiltered vision in the same way the other ones are.
Right.
But this one should be our favorite Robert Eggers movie.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And it just doesn't resonate with me. I loved it. I liked it a lot more this time than I did last time I watched it.
Me too.
But it should be my favorite. And having just rewatched the others, The Witch rattles me and bothers me and it kind of aches in my chest as the family implodes. The Lighthouse I find so absorbing.
And so interesting.
The black and white, that's almost square aspect ratio. Watching it in IMAX, it enraptures me. It like devours my brain. It's all I can think about for a few days because it captures the creative part of my brain and the analytical part. It just nails that sweet spot. And I think that's why it might be my favorite. It might be slowly overtaking The Witch in my head. And The Northman should be my very favorite above and beyond either of those.
I know.
And watching it, like, it made me very happy. I found it thrilling and satisfying and awe-inspiring. But I'm aware the whole time that I'm watching a movie.
Yes, I'm not pulled into this movie the way that I am with the others. I was trying to figure out why don't I like this as much? Because again, on this rewatch, I enjoyed it more than when I first saw it, but I wasn't as absorbed or enthralled or in it as I am with The Witch and with The Lighthouse. Because yeah, it should be our favorite because it's got this whole Shakespeare thing, which is like what
we'll get into
both
that.
of us love, but you love especially.
Yeah.
But also I am fascinated by Viking history and Viking lore. I also have really strong Swedish heritage, so like I have a really special, kinship with it. And I also love the Middle Ages, and the Viking era is smack dab in the middle of the Middle Ages. Like
the commitment to the accuracy, the world building, the mythology. It's Viking Hamlet. It should be our favorite one.
But it's just not.
When the lights come up at the end, I'm left strangely unmoved.
I find that I wasn't really thinking about it very much afterwards. The way that I can't help but think about The Witch and The Lighthouse afterwards.
Yeah, there's no aura. When I watch the other two, or even when I think about the other two, I've got this kind of hum that vibrates through me, this kind of lingering, stunned sensation. But I move on from The Northman much quicker.
Right, and I can't figure out why. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. The only thing I can really tie it to is that it's a much bigger movie than the other two. I love how isolated and insulated and specific the other two are.
I totally agree.
And this one, I mean, he's not doing anything poorly. It looks amazing. It feels amazing. The acting is incredible. The sets and costumes are the greatest thing I've ever seen. But it's just such a big movie. And I think he's so strong with these like insular, intimate portraits of characters, and we don't really get that here.
And we're grading on a weird curve here because comparing it to The Lighthouse and The Witch is tough because if you compare it to just all the other movies ever made, this would still be one of my
favorites. It's like one of the best ones, yeah.
Right? This would still be in your like top 50 of all time.
Right. Standards are just really high.
Right. But it's something with that scale or scope, this being more of an odyssey, more of a journey story. It just doesn't speak to me the same way the other ones do, which are basically chamber plays.
Yeah.
Where they're just in this one kind of raucous location. So yeah, those are our expectations, impressions that were kind of rolling in. But we have more thoughts, theories, literary analysis to actually jump into. As a preview, I'm going to talk about Shakespeare, then I'm going to talk about Faustus. We're going to talk about some echoes from throughout the Robert Eggers filmography that we've covered so far, and then I want to settle in and talk about revenge.
Cool. That sounds great. The things that I'm interested in talking about will just naturally flow into your beautiful structure. So
yes,
we'll just follow that.
You bob and weave. So let's start with what I want to call the Shakespeare smoothie, because this is what I see. This is the matrix I see in everything. Every show, every movie, every game, every story I hate the word consume, but you know what I mean.
Engage in.
Engage with, sure. I see it through this Elizabethan lens. That's just how story makes sense to me. And the thing I love about the Northman, my memory of it is that shorthand of Viking Hamlet. But it's not just Hamlet, and it's not fully Hamlet. There's a lot of other stuff going on, and when I first saw the movie, obviously I was trying to take in the shape of this thing, so everything that wasn't Hamlet, I just chalked up to, oh, that must be part of some Viking mythology I'm not familiar with.
Well, can I quickly say that actually this story of Amleth is it is a real Viking, mythology lore that Hamlet is based on,
right?
By the way.
And
so we're kind of get a circular thing going here.
Yeah, it's the snake eating its own tail. And again, I'm sure there is a cavalcade of echoes and references and earmarks of mythologies that I have no knowledge of. But like I said, I see things through this Elizabethan lens, so that's what I want to play with.
Yeah, and you can't, I don't think Robert Eggers was ignorant of the Hamlet influence here, so he could be referencing the original tale and Hamlet at the same time in whatever he's playing with.
Yeah, and I never argue that any of this is intentional on the artist's part. I just think it's an interesting way for me to make sense of it. But this time when I watched the movie, instead of thinking it was either blurry Viking stuff I didn't understand or Hamlet, I caught a lot more other Shakespeare references.
Cool.
And I think it's kind of most of the dramas are present somewhere in this story.
That's fun.
I really tried to bend the steel of the blade to make this comprehensible, because it is a smoothie. It is a bunch of these plays thrown into the blender, and I'm really excited by kind of the earmarks that I caught along the way. I want to start with Willem Dafoe, who's in 2 scenes of this movie and is, as always, incredible.
Steals the entire show, yeah.
And he's there as this court jester who makes some very pointed japes at the uncle's expense. And I immediately this time saw him as the Ides of March doom herald from Julius Caesar.
Oh, okay, cool.
So then I had Julius Caesar in my head. And a couple scenes later, rip Ethan Hawke's character, who's Amlet's dad. So he's the leader of this clan. He's executed. And it's not just, you could compare it to all the other major dramatic deaths in Shakespeare.
Sure.
But this time, the way he's stuck with all of these spears and arrows, because the first time you watch it, you're like, oh, it's Boromir.
Yeah, yeah.
Watching it this time, it's such a pincushion treason. It reminded me of Julius Caesar getting knifed 1,000,000 times in the Senate.
Well, and it's not just that he's killed, it's that he's killed by his brother. So it's a true betrayal, which is what you get with, Brutus isn't Julius Caesar's brother, but still.
But it's all of these guys who he's more or less brotherly with, who he feels that comfortable and intimate with.
And then there's the treachery. Yeah.
Right. And there is that I'm glad you mentioned that. But we usually use actors' names just because that's what people remember 4 years after they see the movie. It's not the character names, but Ethan Hawke and the uncle is Fjolnir. That name I remember.
Fjolnir is such a cool name.
Cool. But Fjolnir is not fully Ethan Hawke's brother.
Oh, right. He's a bastard, isn't he?
Right.
So he's like a half brother.
And that distance between being a full, like naturalized brother, I think that makes the Caesar case even stronger.
Oh, okay.
Because the guys who kill Caesar aren't technically his brothers. They're just kind of his brothers.
I see.
And I think that's sort of the same relationship that we have in this film.
I like that.
But alternately, to pivot and look at the Ethan Hawke character death from a different perspective, he's almost introduced like Macbeth, where he's this victorious, powerful, homecoming military hero. But then once he gets home, he's murdered and betrayed. So he starts as Macbeth in the way you look at him with the beard and the sword, and he just has this gravity and prowess and a marriage that looks kind of weird and shaky.
Yeah, but with a scary wife.
Exactly. But when he's betrayed and murdered, he almost transforms to be King Duncan.
Yes.
Because that's the inciting incident that sets off all these kind of psychological pitfalls through the rest of the story. And in that same way where you see a character from one angle and then they transform through this major inciting incident, I was initially looking at Fjolnir as the, more or less brother to this Macbethy character.
Yes.
So initially I was looking at Fjolnir like a Banquo.
Yeah.
Because when he does argue with Willem Dafoe and he pushes back against that joke and almost threatens to kill him, he's fiercely loyal. That's that's the defining character trait we get of this guy, is that he's really loyal to Ethan Hawke. So then, 3 scenes later, when he betrays and kills Ethan Hawke, we have to find out who he is now, because he's not the Banquo we thought he was. And this is where we get into Hamlet.
Right.
Because Fjolnir is Claudius.
Of course, yeah.
So he's the evil uncle of the character who finally comes into focus as our hero, our protagonist, and that's Amleth.
So, AKA Hamlet.
Exactly. But he's also born out of the Macbeth framework, because Amleth, when we see the young kid who then grows up to be Alexander Skarsgård,
yes,
when he's in the woods watching his father get slaughtered and then flees on foot, he's Fleance.
Of course, yeah, Banquo's son, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he starts as, right, which even gives him that uncomfortable relationship with
the uncle,
the uncle, who we initially thought was Banquo, and then he pivoted to be Claudius. In the same way, Amleth starts as Fleance and then becomes Hamlet. So you have all these incestuous pivots and recalibrations. So you engage some of the strongest archetypes in all of fiction.
And you can, like you kind of hinted at, you can have Nicole Kidman's character as Gertrude, but also as Lady Macbeth.
That's exactly what I was getting to. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Especially because later on, Nicole Kidman, it becomes this like schemer, very Lady Macbeth style.
Totally.
Or we learn that she is a schemer. She's been one all along. But sorry, yeah.
No, that's exactly where I was going. All of these frameworks, all of these stories persist. They weave in and out of the story. And I'm not going to take 40 minutes to chart all of that.
Let's break down every single character and go through every Shakespeare play.
But you literally could do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's by far my favorite part of this film. And the one that I do want to spotlight is, I think, my favorite convergence of all of these elements of all of these plays I love so much. And those all happen within Nicole Kidman's character. Like you just said, she's Amleth's mom. And she's, halfway through the film, when she's settled in and married to the Claudius figure, you're right. She goes from being this initial Lady Macbeth to something more like Gertrude. And this is why I wanted to play with Hamlet specifically, because my favorite thing about this movie, now that I've seen it a few times and watched it with the analytical lens we need to do a show like this, the Northman asks the question I've always wondered about with Hamlet: who is the real villain of the story? Because you think it's Claudius, right? The guy who kills the dad and he becomes
takes the mom,
right. But I've always thought it was Gertrude.
And you've always been incensed by her betrayal by marrying Claudius.
Because I think from Hamlet's perspective, that would be more of a betrayal. That's the word you used. He's not that into his uncle.
Sure.
His uncle goes from being kind of a neutral figure to a bad figure, but it's a much deeper, more elemental betrayal for Gertrude. And I think if you're looking at these two characters, Fjolnir and Nicole Kidman,
I don't even know her name.
If you look at the monologue she gives at the end, where she reveals that she begged for Ethan Hawke's character to be killed, and then laughed throughout the entire sacking and slaughter of their home, and then ordered Amleth to be killed, and then attempts a weird incest murder fake-out thing, she makes a pretty strong argument that she's absolutely more evil than Fjolnir.
Yes.
So the Gertrude character does rise to the top finally as the big bad.
I see.
But she does, and I love the Lady Macbeth thing, because I think that's sort of a fleeting impression. I think she makes more sense as one of the Macbeth witches.
Ooh,
because
cool.
once you introduce Macbeth, those are the characters I'm going to look for. We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
And I think there are a neat set of 3 witches in this story. And witches, the way I want to define the role of the witches from Macbeth in the context of the Northmen, because almost... you can't go a minute of this movie without Amleth talking about fate.
Yeah, it's everywhere in this movie, which I'm excited to talk about more later.
Yes, exactly. But the witches have the strongest determinative role in the question of fate. They are the arbiters of fate. So one of those is absolutely Nicole Kidman.
Yeah, because she controls the whole thing. She like jumps in and says, yeah, it was actually me the whole time telling, the Claudius stand-in, Fjolnir, telling him what to do. It was me who ordered your death. Like, she is the puppeteer of the whole thing. And say, what is a person who tells you fate, but like the person who's like, often the oracular character is the one who's making things happen.
Absolutely.
Not always. Sometimes they're just messengers, but she's playing a more active role here.
And the other two witches, I think, pretty cleanly are Anya Taylor-Joy's character, because she uses those nature gods. We even see that at the end where she like changes the winds to make the boat go faster.
Yeah.
And the third one is Bjork.
Yes.
With the cool seashells on her eyes. And she steps in when the narrative needs her to.
Yeah. There are other witches though in the movie though. There's also the he witch, the man who's dressed in all of those like cool things and has this oracular element to him. And even Willem Dafoe's character a little bit. He's almost got a like this truth sayer, fool kind of role.
I think, yes, but if you look at the people who most shape and influence the stories, I think it's those three. I think this reanimated version of Willem Dafoe is probably Hamlet Sr.
Okay.
That's probably the ghost of Hamlet Sr.
That's fun. Okay.
From the Hamlet angle. I think the three I named are probably the most influential
plus
kind of fate wielders.
Plus the ones you named are women, so that does help.
That's the other thing, because that is part of the tradition there.
Yeah, because I want to, like, most of the time, like, obviously the wonderful thing about Shakespeare is you can adapt it in all these different ways and make all these changes and interpretations, but most of the time, however the witches are depicted, whether it's as three individuals or as one individual, it's usually a woman in some way, just because that's the way it usually is thought of. So yeah, I get what you're saying.
Sidebar before we get to the Faustus thing. With that whole Nicole Kidman monologue, where she enlightens Amleth on what his father was really like, and she talks about being in cahoots with the Claudius character the whole time, do you believe any of that?
Oh, yeah. What do you mean? Like, I guess there is
she lying?
I guess she could be. There is a possibility that she has sort of changed the way that she sort of reframed her whole life and tried to make sense of it and is lying to herself or just to her son, but like to make what she's done okay, to try to justify it. I could see that. I don't think so, especially because if you go back and like watch the beginning of the movie, she really is laughing as she's being carried off. But like, you have that sort of objective lens of it.
Sure.
But I like that there is room for that ambiguity, that she could be lying.
Because watching it this time, I fully believed her until she tries the incest thing, until she tries to kiss Amleth and entice him to kill Fjolnir. Because it made her look like a really strategic Lady Macbeth style survivor.
Right.
Where when Ethan Hawke was top dog, she was on his team. When he started to flag and wane, then she jumped ship to Claudius and Fjolnir. And now that you're seeing Fjolnir might not be top dog because Amleth has made his way through their home until he's hiding in her bedroom. He might be the most powerful guy.
I can see that.
Her kind of investing in that possibility, saying, oh, if you do kill Fjolnir, well, then I've been on your team all along. But of course, if Fjolnir killed Amleth, she would have gone back to being on his side. There's a chance that she's just giving herself the most options.
Right. You could be totally right. And I think...
Sorry, just to lay it out further.
The
thing is, her, like the incest thing, when she tries to start kissing him, that is to throw him off his game so she can try to kill him. That's when she tries to strike him. So I think ruining his impression of his father adds to that. Because if she has to be scrappy. She's not going to take him in a fist fight. She has to throw him off mentally, and then maybe she can get a few lucky strikes in. Weird Mad Men reference. I just thought
it's toasted.
That might have been part of the play there.
I see.
That might have been her thinking on her feet and just trying to throw him off. I like you said, I really like that ambiguity.
Yeah, and I think regardless of what it is, whether it is the fact that she has been planning this thing all along and that's truly what she always wanted was to be with Fjolnir, or she's being this more survivor role, either way, she is being this enactor of fate like you're talking about. She is acting in this really active role of making things happen the way she wants them to happen, whether she's always had the same plan all along or is kind of, riffing it to survive. I think that's supported by the loom in her room. Did you notice that when he goes into that her room, her chamber, I don't know what to call it back then, her little hut, she's got that loom in the corner, and it's in like every shot. It's like really present. It's really there. And I thought that kind of serves two functions. One, which is I think the more fun one, kind of a more like, did you know kind of thing, is that it mimics the tapestry that I think Polonius hides behind in Hamlet,
nice.
Which is in Gertrude's room. And in this version, our Amleth hides behind the loom instead of the tapestry. But a loom is what you use to make a woven woven material, which is what a tapestry is. So I think that was like a fun little Hamlet reference. But moreover, to me, it really was sort of referencing the threads of fate that they're constantly talking about. These threads that are woven together.
Hercules.
Yeah, exactly. In the way that in like cutting the thread of fate and the threads of fate being woven together and branching off and coming together, like that's what it really reminded me of. So the presence of the loom in her room, I think, really cements her as this
weaver.
Weaver, exactly, of fate. If whether that means she's planning things from the beginning or she's doing things on the fly, it's putting her in that role.
Right, but you could also say that that's her spinning a yarn.
Yeah, right.
And creating this fiction out of whole cloth.
And I really liked when after she has died, after Amleth has sort of like by necessity killed her and her younger son, there's this great shot where they're laying on the floor of the room,
yeah.
And then Fjolnir comes into the frame and he's like perfectly framed in the doorway, and on the right is the loom, the threads of fate, and on the left there's a pelt. I couldn't tell if it was a fox or a wolf. It kind of seemed like too big to be a fox pelt but too small to be a wolf pelt. But either way I liked it, because if it's a wolf pelt, that the wolf is tied to Amleth. Amleth is painted as this wolf. That's sort of this creature that he has to embody to survive. So either Fjolnir is between Amleth and the threads of fate, and those are going to come together and result in his death, or he's standing between the pelt of a fox and the threads of fate. The fox, aka the vixen, which is a female fox, was what Amleth was told to follow on his path to discovering what he's meant to do. So either way, it's like putting Fjolnir right in the center. Like that sort of tells me that is Amleth's like goal. Like that's where his fate has been leading him, is towards Fjolnir. And I thought that was so cool.
I was thinking of it as the wolf pelt representing Ethan Hawke, because that's kind of the scalp that Fjolnir claimed, but it's also the original sin that haunts him. That whole speech Ethan Hawke gives before he dies of like, this is going to haunt you till the end of your days.
I think that's cool too.
That
I like
pelt
that.
is kind of his continued presence.
I like that.
Because that shot has Fjolnir's dead son and dead wife, but there's also this representation of his dead brother.
I think that works really well too. I always think of Ethan Hawke as the Raven King, and so for me the Raven is what. But you're right,
because Amleth is talked about as a wolf. I can call his father sort of a wolf.
Plus,
too.
he has worn a wolf pelt, and when they do that initiation ceremony, they're both acting like dogs and wolves together.
Yes.
So I think you can see it as both, and that's what's so fun.
Yes, it's weird. Ambiguity almost feels like the wrong word. It's more of an elasticity or a dynamism.
Which is what mythology is.
Yes, exactly.
I think a lot of people get really caught up in what's the original myth, like what's the true canonical story, and there isn't one. Mythology is told orally. There's no like cemented, let's write it down for all time. Like over the years, people have written down myths, but those are just versions. There's no true original. There's no true... And even if you go beyond that, it's not just about what happens in the story. Mythology is intentionally opaque,
malleable.
and malleable and open-ended, and it can mean a lot of different things. And people like to categorize like, well, this person is the god of this and they're the god of this, and this story tells us this lesson, but it's not Aesop's fables. Like, it's more complicated and rich and nuanced than that. So I think that sort of idea works well in a story like this.
You know what other text is rich and malleable and dynamic?
Can I guess?
That's right, it's Dr. Faustus. So this is a smaller sidebar, but
okay.
I think it kind of pays dividends here.
Okay.
I was so struck by this time. Maybe I didn't see it the first time I saw the film, but I was struck by the duality. Again, we love talking about duality in the Robert Eggers canon, particularly in The Lighthouse. And I loved the duality that develops between Fjolnir and Amleth. I saw them as rivals the first time I saw the movie, but it seemed uneven, right? Because it's aggrieved son and evil uncle.
Sure.
It's not the simplicity of two lighthouse wikis.
Yeah, they're not peers, exactly.
But they kind of are, especially by the end of it. They both got the beards. They're both naked in a volcano. They're just dudes, right, at that point.
Sure.
And I love how much they ruin their lives to fight each other. And in the Faustus, I don't know, in that language, it's not just that they continually choose to focus on and obsess each other. They pivot their lives to make it all about the other guy. They continuously summon each other. Which
even Mephistopheles?
What?
Even Mephistopheles does that? Because, like, obviously Dr.
No.
Faustus
I'm
is
saying
doing
Hamlet and Fjolnir.
Yeah, but, okay, sorry. I thought you were comparing
but
to
this
two.
is the interesting thing.
Okay, sorry.
Because both characters work in both directions. They are each other's demon. They are each other's ruin.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So Fjolnir kills Amleth's father, and from Amleth's perspective steals his mother, and eventually at the farm he's technically a slave owner of Amleth. But viewed from Fjolnir's perspective, Amleth kills both of Fjolnir's sons and his wife. And then they kill each other.
And he, like, ruins his whole farm and his whole little village that he's got set up.
They ruin each other's lives and kill each other's family.
I see.
And it's even more incestuous than that because they're,
they are
part
family.
of the same family.
Yeah.
They are both Faustus and they are both Mephistopheles.
I see.
So that moment at the volcano where one stabs the other in the chest and the other one beheads the other, they're canceling each other out in that finale. And I don't think it's just cool to look at that this thing ends on a volcano. I'm sure there's some Viking mythology, Norse mythology
I think there is
thing.
too. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure there's some significance, yeah.
But it also works in the Faustus context.
Because of going down to hell?
Because how does Faustus end? Where Faustus is dragged down to hell by Mephistopheles. And if they're both Faustus and they're both Mephistopheles and they kill each other in the same moment and they both fall, so they're literally dragged down to what they call the gates of hell, it's just a perfect neutrality.
I
where
like
they end
that.
up on this equal footing and completely cancel each other out.
Well, and I think this is great because whenever you make a Faustus comparison, I'm thinking, okay, well, what's the contract? Like, what's the deal with the devil here? And here, it's Amleth swearing to avenge. I will avenge you, father. I will save you, mother. I will kill you, Fjolnir. But it's not only that he has this, like, oath that he's sworn, this contract that he signed. The price is his own life. He says at some point, like, I've lived all this time, but I forget what he says, but, like, horribly and with much pain. And it's only until I finish this task that I'll actually decide if I want to even keep on living.
It's part of the contract. It's until you avenge me, you'll live in shame and dishonor. Yeah,
right. You'll live in absolute misery until you've completed the task. So that's sort of the price that he has to pay. And I don't know what you could argue the contract is from Fjolnir. Like, what does he sign? I guess just swearing to take over. But
it's interesting because it's not him selling his soul as much as it's him killing his brother and ruining his own life and reputation for the prize of the kingdom.
Right. And we also learn that he doesn't even get to keep the kingdom. Someone else takes it over, like, very soon after, and then he just lives on a farm instead.
And we learn that lesson the first time we watch Aladdin. Right? The rules, it never works out in your favor. There's always some fine print. Right, where the genie will find a way to swindle you out of whatever you actually asked for.
Yeah,
so that's my little Faustus digression.
I really like that. That's fun.
But let's pull this back to the Robert Eggers conversation, because this is, we're going to talk about Nosferatu, but this is the end of our retrospective for his pre-existing projects. And I found a lot of The Witch, Lighthouse, Brothers, Hansel and Gretel, and Telltale Heart in The Northman. I thought it was more of a smorgasbord than I did the first time I saw the film. So feel free to pepper in your observations as we run through these.
Sure.
The Witch. Just in the first 5 minutes, there's a lot of The Witch here, where during that initiation ritual, Amleth starts levitating. There are a bunch of people dancing almost naked around a fire. There's more and more incest through the movie, and in the same way there are these gestures at incest in The Witch.
Sure.
And a lot of this story, despite it being this big, larger scale journey that we talked about, a lot of the second half takes place on a farm that's being haunted by unseen supernatural forces, or so they think, that's imploding in slow motion as one family gets killed off.
That's pretty cool. I do like that. Plus, there's all this, like visually, there are amazing woods, and there's all this firelight and candlelight and really dark, shadowy interiors. There's a whole lot of that, too.
Yes. For the lighthouse, there is this imagery again during that initiation ritual of men behaving like dogs and being called dogs. There's also a farting joke,
yep,
which strongly pulls me back to
the lighthouse.
Would you like to?
And your goddamn farts.
Thank you. I didn't want to steal your thunder there.
Thank you very much.
And as Amleth is enslaved on this farm, there's an increasing amount of manual labor.
Yeah, and it looks so grueling and painful, and there's a lot of that.
We don't get the montages that we usually do.
No, there aren't any montages in this movie. It's shot like there are all these similarities that you're identifying, but I feel like overall the way it is put together is visually very different than the others.
It is an outlier, and that's not a qualitative statement, but it is distinct from everything that came before it. Brothers, that third short film that we talked about on Patreon, the prologue, the inciting incident, the first 10 minutes of this film is one brother killing another in the woods.
That's true.
With a pokey.
That's true, with a pokey. That's right. I like that. That's
Hansel
fun.
and Gretel.
Mm-hmm.
I was struck by when we watched that because it is black and white and it is so strangely lit. And the witch there is kept in the shadows of the house. And I loved how much the villains were in the shadows here. Whether it was extended shots of almost fully blacked out characters in front of the fire.
Yes.
Where you just see their silhouette. So many of the characters were kept in the shadows. Amleth spends a lot of his time on the farm hiding in the shadows, watching, stalking his victims, hiding on roofs, like you kept talking about Assassin's Creed when we were watching it. But I think it's also, we talked about the prosthetics of the villains in those early short films, particularly Telltale Heart and Hansel and Gretel, but the witch has this full mask on where she looks like more of a puppet. She looks like more of a Halloween creature. And I was constantly struck by how inhuman Amleth felt. And it's not just the physique, it's not just how jacked he was, it was the posture.
Yeah, the way he was walking was so strange. I liked it a lot. I was trying to figure out why make this character choice. For me, it felt like he's still his child self, like in this giant man's body, but so he doesn't quite know how to stand and he's not quite sure of who he is or how he wants to be. He's so like I don't know, trapped in that almost Arrested Development situation, and so that's why he's kind of hunched over and awkward. I mean, he's still like, he knows clearly what he wants. He wants, to avenge his father. He wants to save his mother and kill his uncle, but he's very like physically capable, certainly, but he's still so not comfortable in himself because he hasn't been able to live fully. He's just been so focused on this one goal, this one contract he signed when he was 12, and now he's trapped in that. So that's how I interpreted that strange posture he has.
He's almost trying to hunch, but he's too gigantic. He's hulking, but he's trying to hunch. And this past Sunday, we did an episode of the Breakfast Buffet, a roundup series on Patreon, talked about 4 different movies. And one of those was Werewolves, this really interesting B horror movie that we talked about. And I loved the posture of those hulking werewolves. And Skarsgård looks exactly like those werewolves here.
Yeah, which makes sense because he's embodying this wolf persona. So
but
I like that.
He's just a fella.
Yeah, he's just a dude.
He's just standing there, and he looks as terrifying as a werewolf in the kitchen in that movie.
I did really like that.
The last Robert Eggers retrospective echo to play with is Telltale Heart. And I think that one is shining the brightest as we're a few weeks removed from watching those short films. I think that one's becoming my favorite.
I did really like that one, yeah.
And the most potent part of that story, even though it's, I don't know, what was it, 10 or 20 minutes?
It was 20 minutes.
It is the forced proximity between the murderer and the victim. It's that seething, stalled resentment as he plots the murder, as you see him build up to it, but he's constantly denied opportunities, or he flakes out. And I loved how much of this movie, and I don't mean just the section at the farm where Amleth is not revealing his identity and he has all of these kind of drive-by interactions with Fjolnir. It's like 5 or 10 minutes in, the first time they're face-to-face. They are bobbing and weaving past each other for almost the entire film. And true. It felt like that kind of unendurable tension of Telltale Heart stretched out across more than 2 hours. That became kind of the driving drama of the story.
I like that. And it is such a contrast too, because with the Telltale Heart, the person that the murderer wants to kill is a dying old man, and here it's very much an equal, like physically and mentally, right? This like adult man who's also this great warrior. So that change is interesting, but I like that idea still remains.
It's more of a rivalry, but I think there's some underlying continuity from the Telltale Heart.
And you see some of that in The Lighthouse too. I mean, it's not as direct. No one's like actively plotting to kill the other, but they're always both thinking about it the whole time.
Sure. And there's a generational divide there as well.
Yes, and this almost father-son dynamic, which is, but also peers and brothers at the same time. Like you get that in The Lighthouse a lot and in The Northman. So that's cool.
One of my other favorite things in The Northman is the number of returning actors from the Robert Eggers kind of repertoire.
Cinematic universe.
Yeah, no, seriously.
Yeah.
It's everyone except Caleb from The Witch.
And the little kids.
It's the mom I meant of the principal characters.
Okay, yeah.
It's the mom, the dad, and Anya Taylor-Joy. And then from The Lighthouse, you have Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, I did enjoy that. That was
excellent.
That was quite fun. More about just like comparing this to the others, if we can for a moment, because like I said earlier, the way that it's shot and the way that it comes together is very visually distinct from the others. And one of the things that really struck me most on this reviewing was the number of long one takes, and not just like that it's one shot, but he's doing some really impressive camera work in that the camera is moving in these seemingly impossible ways. Like one that I'm thinking of is when you do the first time jump, like after Ethan Hawke is killed, and we first get to Alexander Skarsgård, there's like this shot that's like the camera is looking at this river and it's kind of flanked by two bushes basically. And you see the Viking boats come into view and it's gorgeous and amazing. And then the camera moves forward and ends up on the boat and we get to see Alexander Skarsgård for the first time. And it stays there for a long time. And then it pans around and more things happen and the guys get shot with the arrows. And I'm like, how the fuck did they get the camera from the shore onto the boat so smoothly? Like, I know it was a handoff somehow, and there was probably a crane involved. I don't know. I know nothing about cameras. Okay. I love movies and I know nothing about cameras. It's incredible. But there's a lot of stuff like that.
The entire Viking raid sequence. Exactly.
Yeah. It's long tracking shots where the camera is following usually Amleth, but sometimes others, or sometimes it follows Amleth and then it goes off to somebody else and then it comes back to him, especially when he's sneaking around the farm and stuff. And I was trying to figure out what function all of these long tracking shots are serving, because they move, but they move slowly and they always contain a lot of different vignettes and scenes. It's not like just one tracking shot within one interior. It goes into the room and then it leaves and then it zooms around and then it comes back. And so it's like constant movement. And I was trying to figure out what function that is serving, because he doesn't do that in his other movies, at least not that I've noticed. And I don't know what to make of it. And I was trying to figure out if it had something to do with our perspective and like Amleth's POV, or maybe it's more about like seeing the full picture, the full story, because it's this mythology. I don't really know what to do with it. I don't know if you'd had any thoughts about it.
I think it has to do with this being a larger journey that one character is on. I think it's the same reason we don't get montages of hard labor. We just get real-time sequences of it.
Yeah.
There is something calculated. Amleth, he has this promise that he made when he was, I don't know. I never know how to...
I'm guessing he was about 12.
I can never tell how old kids are. But yeah, and then for decades after that, he's playing this long game of avenging his father eventually. So there is something premeditated and calculated and methodical in his entire quest. And we see moments where he could strike too early. Right? He's like wound up with the axe and Fjolnir's about to come around the corner, but it's not the right moment. So there is something patient and methodical here. And I think it gets into the larger concept of revenge within the film, where it is a more patient, strategic, methodical arc.
I see. Like you have to see the full picture and really like think about it and look all around you and like zoom ahead and like play 4D chess before you can really do it.
Because the gods or the mythology or whatever is in charge of this story, every time it prevents him from pulling the sword out of the scabbard, it's telling him it's not the right moment.
You have to wait.
The forces controlling all the fate that you talked about before,
yes,
they have a longer plan here.
Cool. I like that. And I think also if you think about mythology, like I said earlier, myths are told orally. They're told like a narrator tells you a story. And so the narrator's job in telling a story is to give you that full picture and to tell you everything. So it feels like as we're tracking, like going through this tracking shot and going over all these different characters and scenes, that's the narrator carrying us through all the different scenes and not stopping, you know, like they're telling the story continually. You're wrapped with attention and like they don't stop. And so the shot doesn't stop either.
There's
Maybe
something leisurely about the way the story is told that makes it all the more insidious. When Amleth is being tortured and he tells Fjolnir, you could take out your sword and strike me right now and it wouldn't connect because it's not my time to die.
Yeah.
I don't think he's just trying to psych the other guy out.
I think he means
it. He fully, because the whole arc of his life is this slow motion revenge quest. And that patience is the thing that is so freaky because he's hulking, but he doesn't move quick like a zombie or a werewolf. He's slow like a bear.
Yeah.
Let's talk about revenge for a second. This is the point I want to close on here. Because I think I made the assumption for a couple of years after we first saw the film, it's a story about revenge. It's a Viking Hamlet revenge story.
Yeah, sure, easy.
But I want to question that because that's what we do here. Is this a story about revenge?
I mean, yeah, but like it's probably about other things too.
Because I think there are three ways to look at that.
Okay.
There are three ways to, the follow-up question is obviously, if it is a story about revenge, what does it say about revenge? And I think there are three options here. One, is this a righteous revenge quest, almost like John Wick? Two, is this a statement about the futility of dedicating your life to revenge because they both die at the end and cancel each other out, and all these people die for no reason along the way.
Sure.
Or is this more actively a condemnation of revenge stories and dedicating your life to revenge because he abandons Anya Taylor-Joy and his children to pursue Fjolnir and go die in a volcano.
And he kills his mother and a kid. Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of other people. Yeah. That's a really great question. And you know what it is? I think it's kind of, I'm going to cheat, and I think it's kind of all three.
Well, me too.
Because I think, I'll say what I think because you've clearly thought more about this than I have. So
I'll go first. I just want to riff with this now.
Okay. So like I think for Amleth, it is a celebration of revenge because he wanted to die in battle. He doesn't there's a lot of talk in Viking culture and in this movie about the shame of becoming a long beard. Graybeard, thank you. The shame of growing old. Because what is much more honorable is to die in battle when you're still young and not fertile.
Virile?
Thank you. I was like, not fertile. Ew. I was like, what is the word? Futile? When you're still virile and capable. Sorry. And so I think Amleth feels successful in what he set out to do. He does have to grapple with, okay, I'm not going to actually save my mother because my mother is not who I thought she was. And so he has to pivot and go slightly different directions. Like his threads of fate change a little bit in ways he wasn't expecting, but he pivots and adapts, but he still achieves what he wants to achieve. He avenges his father and kills Fjolnir. And he also dies at the end at the same time. And I don't think he views it as canceling each other out because then we get to see this mythical suggestion that he does get to go to Valhalla. Like he gets to go to this, celebrated heaven where warriors go.
And we get that Banquo implication where he says his bloodline will live on, but when he touches Anya Taylor-Joy's wound and he sees the kind of family tree, those two kids that he's going to have are dressed in royal garb. Yes. So it's that Banquo thing of you won't live to be king, but you will beget kings.
Right. So he succeeds everywhere. So for him, he did succeed. For us, the audience, we see the devastation that his revenge quest causes.
Right.
And we see how devastated Olga is that Amleth has left and that she's alone to raise these two babies on her own and just doesn't get to be with this man that she loves. And we see Nicole Kidman die. We see her young son die. It's not his fault. He's a kid. Now Fjolnir's older kid, he sucks and he could die, right? But we see all of these other people, needlessly die throughout this story. And it's not like after this, the rest of the people on the farm are like, well, cool, now everything's going to be fine. Now, the slaves were freed, but they don't have any resources. There's going to be more devastation and bloodshed going on. So and also we do get to see that the fact that things don't go quite the way Amleth wanted them to might tell us again about the futility of revenge, or again, it's condemning it. So I think it's kind of both. It just depends on who you're viewing the story as.
Exactly. And again, the ambiguity, not just of the source material, but of the way this story is rendered, the way these characters are brought to life. You can view things from Anya Taylor-Joy's perspective, or Nicole Kidman's, or Alexander Skarsgård, or Ethan Hawke, or even Clay's Bang.
Who is
I've been
that?
avoiding. That's Fjolnir.
Oh, I don't know his name.
I don't know how to pronounce his name, but I do know his name. But yeah, I think it is that dynamism again, where it is righteous as much as it is futile.
Yes.
And I don't think it's a full-throated celebration of dedicating your life to revenge, but it's also not completely a condemnation of it.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's how everybody always views revenge. That's such a broad statement, but like it's such an all-sweeping statement. But like it is this thing that every time you watch a revenge story, you want the guy to win. You want John Wick to kill all of those guys who killed his dog. Like you want the person to succeed. But really, if you zoom out, you're like, okay, but at what cost? And then at the end, is it worth it? Is it satisfying? It's never clear. Like some stories will paint things in a certain way, but if you look at it, if you try to look at it as a more like third party objective viewer, it's never clear if it is worth it. But you also don't want somebody to just give up and roll over and take it all lying down. So what do you want? I
think that's the linchpin moment of the film when I watched it this time was Amleth talking to Anya Taylor-Joy on the boat, where she says, why don't you just go with us on the boat and we can raise the kids and just set up camp
all about
elsewhere.
This. Yeah.
And he says, no, because if I leave Fjolnir alive, he will hunt us to the ends of the earth and kill us all. And I believe him and I believe her. Like, if you look at Macbeth as the Shakespeare drama that is about fate and trying to, like, you know, rattle against the chains of destiny and create your own ending, the witches in that story, who are the arbiters of fate there, they are all on the same page. They almost like take side bets on some of the things that are happening in the proceedings, but they're all kind of working towards the same goal, right? They're not trying to outfox and outsmart each other through the play.
Yeah.
We see them as one unit. We call them the three witches. We see them as a collective. The three witches we talked about here have very different goals.
That's true. They're not working together at all. They're totally on their own journeys of fate weaving. Yeah.
And I think that serves the nuance of it, because it's not just a guy talking to his wife. It's this fated Hamlet prince talking to one of the witches. But we know there are other witches pushing in the other direction, which gives her point much more veracity, which makes that Fjolnir point mean more, because it's not just him who's hunting Amleth. It's all the powers of Nicole Kidman. And we don't know when Bjork's going to show up again. Like, you know what I mean? There is that depth baked into this story too, not just borrowed from the source material.
I do really like that. Yeah, and I think that is what makes this such a delightful movie to watch, and it makes sense in the context of the mythologies and stories that it's pulling from.
I got a lot more out of this one on this subsequent viewing.
Definitely, me too.
And prepping it to talk about in this way. I think this is maybe the most fruitful, but for some reason, least enjoyable.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, again, it's not that I didn't enjoy watching the movie.
No, I adored it.
And I'm loving talking about it. But
compared to two of my all-time favorites, it pales a little.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see what we think about Nosferatu for all kinds of reasons, but because it is a bigger story than something like The Witch or The Lighthouse. It's more in line with the Northmen. I mean, it's obviously a very different time period and story and mythology that it's pulling from and source material. But I'm curious to see what we think about this slightly bigger scope story that's also deeply steeped in a specific mythology and lore that is very, very present and familiar to modern audiences.
But also, like Shakespeare and Faustus, I am incredibly well studied in my Dracula lore.
Well, yeah. And so I'm pretty nervous. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty nervous because my expectations are really high, but maybe after the Northmen I should learn to manage them. I don't know. Do you know if Eggers had final cut on Nosferatu?
Yes.
Okay. So my expectations are really high.
I don't think he's ever gonna let that happen again.
Yeah, I read that he was pretty frustrated by the editing process of the Northmen. So there were so many moments where he wanted people to be fully nude because it would be more accurate, and they were like, we can't do that because then we can't have this be an R rating, Robert. So anyways, it's funny to me. But
a Viking movie that takes its source material seriously probably shouldn't be R rated.
Well, exactly. I read that he, like, obviously he consulted like so many historians, Viking historians and stuff. And there was this one professor that he worked with, I think, who's either from Denmark or Sweden. I think Sweden. And he said that this is probably the most accurate Viking film ever. And I was like, I believe it.
You could tell when there were implications of horrors beyond our comprehension.
Absolute horrors, yeah.
And it's funny because you were talking about Assassin's Creed, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla is the Viking one, which we both love and have put a lot of time into.
Mm-hmm.
This is not even the full-bore Viking story, and this makes Valhalla look like the Pixar version.
I know, exactly. Yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, so, I mean, The Northman's a delightful film, and everybody should see it. And it's not as captivating for some reason as something like The Witch or The Lighthouse, but it's still
pretty incredible.
It's a fabulous movie. It's a fabulous Viking movie. It's a fabulous Shakespeare movie. Like it's really great. So this is really fun. I enjoyed this discussion. Well, I'm really excited to talk about Nosferatu, and just so you're not worried, it's Tuesday today, but we are dropping our Nosferatu episode this coming Sunday because we want to get it out as soon as possible. We're seeing the movie on Thursday, the day after Christmas. So check us out on Sunday when we'll release our Nosferatu episode. This Friday, we'll continue our Game of Thrones discussions. We're going through chapter by chapter. That's been a real fun. So if you want more like, fantasy literary discussions, we've got that over there for you. And we should have mentioned this at the top, but if you still need a last minute Christmas gift for a friend or family member or loved one, you can get it. You can get Lemon Tarts in Space. Sorry, my brain is done.
That's okay.
Lemon Tarts in Space is Cam's book. It is a sci-fi fiction comedy. It's a delightful time, and it is available.
Light science fiction, dark comedy.
Thank you. Sorry. It's available through the link down below. It's available as an audio drama or as a full novelization. It's a fantastic, rip-roaring time. We appreciate your support. You can check it out down below.
Ridley Scott's Alien by way of Monty Python.
That's right. Yes, that's the perfect way to describe it.
Produced and acted and edited and the whole shebang, audio drama, or it's fully adapted as a novelization. Yes, you can get that all delivered incredibly quick to you. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back in just a few days with another brand new episode.